Lamine Yamal steps into McDonald's, looks left, sees Pulisic, looks right, sees Jimenez. Gives a nod to Ronaldinho in the corner with a FIFA World Cup meal. Ronaldinho sees Son in the booth. Son finds Beckham going for extra Big Mac sauce. He's got Davies at the table just behind him. Davies going for his collectible cup. But a steal by Henry, who pulls his own collectible cup. Collect one of 9 legendary cups with a FIFA World Cup meal.
At participating McDonald's for a limited time while supplies last. All rights reserved. 2026 McDonald's at FIFA World Cup 2026.
Are all batteries the same? That's like asking if all soccer players are the same. Take Messi, the most decorated player ever. Is there any other player who has achieved that? No, just him. Now take Duracell. Is there any other battery with power boost ingredients inside? No, just Duracell. Remember, goats only trust goats because they're built different. And Messi only trusts Duracell.
So I wanted to talk about the cost of being right. Like sometimes when you're right, that argument isn't always the best approach to get you the right outcome, right? The truth always matters, but it's finding that delicate balance, but also, of how to present it. But also sometimes it's just not worth the cost. There's just so many examples. I wanted to call this the stubborn bastard episode, right? Because, you just being right does not always make you that cool. Everybody knows that guy who's really smart and knows a lot, but is kind of a dick and you just don't even want to be around him. And sometimes it's not even worth having their help, just because you don't even want to deal with them and the aggravation that they bring you in your day. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the thing. And I think also, like, people get so tense and worked up about being right that it comes at a heavy cost. And I think that matters to everybody. You think, oh, well, it doesn't matter because, I'm right. And that's what matters, the truth, but does it, just because you know something doesn't mean you should say it. I think that's the big thing. Like, even, you look at like Jesus or somebody like that, right? Mm-hmm. Like, even in the Bible, he had, he hung out with all these sinners and he wasn't like, hey, you're really screwing up here. Look at what you did. This is wrong. Let me tell you why. Sometimes it's like, hey, what can I do to help you out? Mm-hmm. And that approach, having that different tact could maybe take you a lot further in life, take you in further in your work, in your preparedness, when you carry a firearm and you deal with cops, all these things, it matters. Kevin?
Right. When I first got married, somebody told me that. Said, in your marriage, you can be right or you can be happy. And sometimes that is legitimate sentiment.
Exactly. Let's go down that road for a minute of marriage, right? So, sometimes we have to prove that we're right. And like, we have the facts and the evidence, and I know, but it creates resentment. It creates distance between you. It creates hurt feelings. And I'm not saying we should be a sheep, we shouldn't just go along to get along, but there's also a way to have tact and, and also I think it's choose your battles, right? Like, even with your kids, like raising kids, you choose your battles. Like, what's important, or do I want to constantly be a nag and pushing them? And some of that stuff, does it even matter? Like, is it really going to help them? If they go and play in the dirt and get dirty, what's the consequence? What's the cost of that? You have to choose your battles. I know with me, one of the big one early on was always like politics and the Constitution. and what's right there. The 10th Amendment is always the one that I was always quoting of, well, the federal government only has the authority that's outlined in the Constitution,
Right.
and they have no jurisdiction over other things beyond that. And we have them like regulating seat belts. And now I know you could get into the semantics of, well, the federal government doesn't technically require seat belts. I think they might now, but I know they didn't when it first came out, but they would basically bribe the states where you're not going to get any funding.
Right. You're not going to get funded. Yeah. And that's
do it. Right. That's one of the ways that they always kind of come down heavy with it. And they bring it that way. They always bring it that way where they come down heavy. Right. And they,
right. Right. We take all your money, your tax money, and then only let you have it back if you do what we tell you.
Same thing with the Department of Education. And again, this stuff is clearly outside the scope of the 10th Amendment. They're supposed to only regulate like interstate commerce and not,
and somehow that touches every single thing in everybody's
exactly
life.
Like, or we could talk about, the Social Security card, where they clearly came out and said that ID number would never be used for ID purposes, right? Your Social Security number.
Right.
And, or we're going to put the Social Security funds in a lockbox that's never going to be touched. And now it's like, there is no lockbox, it's just part of the general fund, and they do whatever they want. That's why I always am amazed that they're like, yeah, it could run out at any time. And I'm like, could it? You're really just you keep taking it. So,
right.
It's not like it can't run out. But that's from that aspect. Let's talk about, I mentioned being a gun owner, so with that, with a traffic stop. Now there's a lot of states, one, you don't need to say anything if you have a gun. And if you have a legal concealed carry or something, you don't have to report it. There's a lot of states that you do have to report it. Now, whatever, as a society, these are rules that we agreed upon, and, we're playing the game in society. But how many videos, or states where, forget guns, but the Constitution in the state will say you don't have to show your ID, right? Like a cop can't just come up and intimidate you for no reason, or, come harass you for no reason. They can't just come up and demand, or New York had that stupid stop and frisk that stopped all the crimes, but it like trampled everybody's rights, it conditioned you,
right.
After September 11th. But is it worth it to deny? Like, if I have my license right in my pocket and I can just be like, yeah, here, dude, whatever, yeah, look at it. And then, oh, all right. Yeah, go on. All right. Or they like to stare at it like they're thinking of something like, oh,
Right.
I see your last name. You're not related to that dirtbag Kevin, right? And I'm like, oh, that's awkward. I don't know any Kevins. And, or, oh, wait, you're Chuck. I've heard that podcast. You're a real smart ass, aren't you? These are the things that I'm opening the door if I show them my ID.
Right.
I've heard you.
Right. Yeah. And clearly, a police officer can stop you just walking down the street and ask for your ID. But most states, you don't have to show them your ID unless they articulate a crime.
Or you're being suspected, right, of a crime, which if they can articulate it, right? Yeah.
Right. And you can say, go fuck yourself. That's covered by freedom of speech, and you are fully within your rights, and that is not going to end well for you either way.
That's the thing. Like, same thing too. People are like, oh, well, you don't have to roll down your window, or this stupid stuff. I don't even know where that's a thing. I don't know the law that says, it sounds to me like a lawful order, and like, I don't know.
Right.
It really doesn't matter. Right. and I don't know what you think. Like, are the cops just jumping in and grabbing people? Because I feel like if they're the same guy that'll just jump in and grab you, I feel like it's the same guy that's happy to whip his baton out or take his gun and crack the window. Like, I don't know what the benefit is. Or
there are a lot of people that have had the shit kicked out of them, and been arrested for resisting arrest and no other crime. You know what I mean? That's still
or
a felony.
The cop, sees you there and just, starts shooting you for no reason. Just stay still so they can shoot you. You have to comply, Kevin. It's that kind of idea of we just comply, and anyway, missing work because you have this long traffic stop and you're waiting for them to go get a dog to sniff your car. I know you don't like that it always ends bad when whatever, but what are you going to do? I watch these videos and trailers and they say you don't even need to wait. Like you can say, well, am I being detained? Because they have a reasonable amount of time for a traffic stop. But again, I don't know that it's going to end well for you because the cop's just going to be like, yeah, I have the right. I can do whatever I want. We always see these interactions and you clearly know that the cop is in the wrong and, they're putting the laws up on the screen in front of you, but it really doesn't matter because he's going to shoot you if you try and leave. That's not going to end better for you. But
you can die knowing you were right.
But you were right. That's the thing. How about one of the ones always gets people is like with your neighbors. You're like, ooh, that fence is like a foot over my property line. I'm going to take them to court and I'm going to, sometimes it's not worth the fight. But you also don't want to be a doormat. And I don't know, like, I think wisdom is how we kind of learn to find those boundaries, right? As you get older, you realize what fights are worth fighting and what fights are not. A lot of times, like family inheritance, right? When people pass away, how many times do we see families torn apart or spending money on lawyers to just, oh, I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that. Dad was crazy when he said that. That's always that. Her mom was crazy when she said that. And I'm like,
they all got the Alzheimer's and yeah. You got to get down there and get in there when they're crazy so you can get them to change the well over and get power of attorney.
Start sucking up to grandma or whatever,
yeah.
That's always the way. Yeah, that happens. No, you can definitely get into issues with that and you can spend thousands on attorneys. And that's even divorce lawyers. How much money do they make off people just because they can't find a way to agree, and it's just, I had to be right, or I wanted to get that car that my husband loves so much because then I'll really punish him. I want his 65 Mustang Fastback and I don't even care about that car. I hate that car because he loves that more than me and, whatever. So we don't need that kind of thing going on and getting in the way. But let's, maybe you can use that stuff to your advantage. How often do we see comments like Kevin's pretty good about this, but if I'll see the comments in like Spotify or iTunes or whatever. And it's funny because, that's, I think where I was going with the Mary thing is me and Kevin have a lot of sarcasm that people don't tend to pick up on. That was the whole email thing that we were talking about. And, I'll go down where we'll say something and we'll make a comment and people will be so pissed off and there'll be people that absolutely agree with us. They just didn't pick up on the sarcasm thing. I think a lot of it comes from being a veteran and then a fair amount comes from being just being from New York or being an asshole in general. I don't know. Kevin, where does the sarcasm come from?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's definitely a New York thing, but it's also,
A New
it's
York
just
thing.
we're both naturally kind of dickheads, That's
We're
that's
just
part of it.
dickheads. And yeah, so people are gonna, realize that and realize that maybe you don't want to hang out with us. I could tell you. But you damage friendships, you divide the family, you cause stress. It's not, the things we say on social media, sometimes you tear people apart with that. Sometimes that'll hurt things. There was a good one from George Washington. George Washington understood that during the Revolutionary War, like he would retreat and save his troops and that kind of thing. And people were like, "Oh, look, he's a coward. He retreated, never retreat." But he understood that you don't have to win every battle to win the wars. Sometimes it's the right wars that, really matter. And that's what you need to choose, So, be like George Washington. That's all I could say. Like the distinction, changed history because he was willing to be patient and play it like when it mattered, right? And that's kind of a cool thing. What about like preparedness, Kevin? How does it affect you there?
Yeah, well, one of the things that comes up a lot is people like really focus on the one thing that they think is going to go wrong.
Yeah,
It's definitely going to be an EMP. I'm preparing for financial collapse. I'm preparing for this, and then you get a fucking snowstorm, and all your plans are screwed up.
Yep. Yep. No, that happens too often where, our gear and our stuff will just, you know, be inaccessible. Maybe it was flooding and we had all our stuff stored out in the shed and now it's all soaked and ruined and the family's desperate. We got to pack up and, go hang out somewhere and all our supplies are gone.
hmm
Um, and that's the thing. I think being open-minded, being adaptable, I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, maybe that's the takeaway is just learning to adapt to whatever comes.
hmm
And, that's how you need to, shape the world into what you want it to be. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Um, you know, by being prepared for whatever tragedy, being prepared for an oppressive government, being prepared for an EMP, being prepared for, the power going out or, cyber attack. I know those things don't, the preparations are kind of the same, but, like we said, the flooding, the hurricanes, these things, they matter. There's something real. What if there's a giant earthquake and you're cut off or, like happened to Puerto Rico with that hurricane just, devastating the island. It matters, how you prepare. And I think by keeping an open mind and not being so rigid, also being able to work with people, it's going to matter so much,
hmm
with how rigid you are in your ways and, whatever. I mean, that's how marriage works, right? I mean,
Right.
you can't stay together and be happy if you don't,
You don't
find a
compromise a
way
little bit.
to
Yeah.
communicate, right?
hmm
And share and, get along. It's like kindergarten, play well with others. I
hmm
think people are missing that step a lot now.
Yeah.
I see it in the workplace.
Yeah, one of the other ones that I see a lot with prepping is people tell me about all this cool gear they have, and
Yeah.
I love gear, dude. Don't get me wrong, I love that shit. But if you don't know how to use it, if you're not practicing with it, it's not going to be very beneficial. You can
Yeah.
have 30 different types of firearms in your house, and then you actually need it, and you have the perfect weapon for this scenario and you don't know how to fucking shoot it. You can't figure out how to get the safety off or load the magazine and you don't know what the fuck you're doing. Well, you have the perfect gun for it, but you don't know what the fuck you're doing. So it doesn't matter. A lot of those types of things come up in emergencies, when you're you're stressed, you're trying not to panic, and the things don't work exactly the way they're supposed to. And then all of a sudden, everything goes downhill.
And that's the thing. There's, they talk about it like quicksand. Once one thing starts to fall apart, then it just keeps escalating and
Right.
going and going. And more things, once you lose focus and you get distracted. And that's the thing. By being so rigid, you end up, creating that problem by, not being flexible enough to work with people, to understand, to find a way to get along. Yeah, I think like that's the thing. Like as a country, politics has divided us so much. It's the Republicans hate the Democrats and whatever, and we're so worried as Republicans and Democrats at hating each other that we don't realize it's just government in general that sucks.
Yeah.
Like they're both spending a butt ton of your money. They're both filled with scandal and corruption. Both sides seem to fill up pages of the Epstein list, right?
The Epstein list that they still haven't released, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
That Congress demanded that they released it, right. And they just said, nah.
Yeah, but how much do they push? Because they're like, yeah, maybe you don't. Like, I'm going to say, that's what I always find. Like, there were always, like, Republicans would always be, like, one vote short. Because, like, everybody's like, all right, you take the fall this time.
Right. You're not coming up for election for another 4 years, so you're going to have to go for it.
And the rest of us will be like, yeah, we care about that issue. We care about the people. And then, we all take the fall for it, and that's so often. And, realize politicians they're all about the bucks, Kevin. They're trying to find the money and take it out of your pocket and either line their pockets or their friends' pockets.
Yeah.
And the reason it's their friends is just because their friends might give them more money back in other ways.
Yeah.
It's basically just to line their pockets.
Well, you can serve in Congress. Indirect. You can be incompetent in every way and get elected to Congress and then get out and get a fantastic job as a lobbyist, making
or it's my experience, you can become president if you're incompetent in every way.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not just talking about the current president. This goes back.
Yeah, we've had a lot of incompetent presidents. I mean, in my lifetime, I'm talking about, I'm not even that old,
We're probably too old if we can count that many presidents that kind of suck. Yeah, no, that's something though. And we get so caught up in fighting each other over the little things. People vote over just one issue. It'll just be, I'm hell-bent on the Second Amendment. I'm hell-bent on pro-abortion or against abortion or whatever. And I can't see anything else. And it doesn't matter because that one right is so important, but I throw away every other right. Well, how about we fight for all the rights kind of thing? Like, kind of just keep moving to what you do. But I think like it's almost like you lay out a list of what's important to me, right? Say maybe the most important thing is being, pro-life or pro women's rights, or maybe it's pro-gun or anti-gun or healthcare or whatever. You need to decide what are the most important things, kind of put a value to it, like 1 through 5, and then lay out the candidates and see who's checking more of the boxes and the things that matter instead of just one thing, and what's going to move you in the right direction. Now, I will say, like, who they pick for Supreme Court justices does matter. And that stuff does have a lot of checks for a broader scope of areas, right? Again, I don't know why it's always guns and pro-life, because spending is huge. That affects your life so much. And the money you have, you can use to support these other, things. making sure that they're taking care of people. Eventually we all get old and we're going to be like, wait, I wanted Social Security too. I paid into it for forever. It'd be cool if I got something there. Or I don't even have to care about Social Security. Let's just say, how about you don't rob me by taxing me to death on my 401k, the money that I've been growing for forever as my retirement, and now you're just stealing it all. Or they steal it in people's inheritance. We have these inheritance taxes. Now, right now, they're pretty high, and it's not that big of a thing in a lot of places.
Yeah, unless it's in millions of dollars, but still, it's not your fucking money,
It's not your money. You didn't earn it. We always we hate the billionaires. We're like those evil bastards. They made all that money and they should be paying their share. Well, they probably, even if they're not taxed indirectly. I know Kevin and we get into discussions on how they're able to hide their money in corporations and things like that, and basically able to write off a lot of things where it's not income per se. And that's all true. There are ways to manipulate the system. However, if, originally it was supposed to be that we would all pay the same amount, right? It would be that, and I know, income, well, we all do on our first $100,000, we all pay the same amount. Right. Or, I think it's the breaks are first 30,000, we all pay the same amount. The next 100,000, we all pay the same amount, the same percentage. So in theory, but then that percentage increases as it goes up. And that's kind of fair because you could argue, well, yeah, if I made $1 billion also, I would have to pay that higher percentage. But is it really? I mean, because bottom line, they're getting the same benefits from the federal government, a rich guy, as the poor guy. Honestly, the poor guy might be getting more benefits from the federal government, and yet they're paying a greater amount, even though they're an individual, per se. So it's hard to say, Well,
I mean, I think the big difference is that you get to a certain level of income and you don't have to follow the laws anymore. You can just rape kids and
right. So if you do that, so maybe that's why they're paying more, is for that elite status.
Yeah, for that status where you can commit crimes, right? Because if it's a fine is the punishment, then for rich people it's just a fee. It's not a crime,
Exactly. When I was younger, I was like, man, I could go to Thailand, and I was like, look, if I had $5,000 a year, I could live, pretty sweet and whatever. And I was looking at things, and when I started digging into it, and this is back in the 90s, they had something called the Thai Elite Card, where basically you'd pay 25,000 US, and they would give you a card that gave you that kind of status where, you go after kids, whatever you want to do, they just,
you're just fine.
You're crime free, you don't have to worry about any consequences and stuff. And that always, that's a bad road. But that's it. That corruption, money buys corruption, it buys opportunity in all ways, all aspects. But that's the thing, right? So I guess, I mean, maybe even a better topic for the episode is choosing your battles, right? Knowing when it's worth the fight, or when it's not. What are you going to gain by it? Is it going to move your agenda? That's always one of the things. I used to get pissed off at Ron Paul or Rand Paul, both of them, dad and son, that the way they vote, because they'd have these principles, but you'd have something that was going to move the agenda in their direction dramatically, but it didn't move it all the way. So they'd be like, nope, can't do it. I would never vote. If they're like, oh, we're going to, tax everybody at 70 or at 50% when we were taxing everybody at 70%. And you'd get Rand Paul out there going, it's not zero. I don't like it. I can't support it. Yeah. Well, yeah, but it was going to move us in the right way. And
I can't think of, honestly, I can't think of anything that Rand Paul did vote for.
That's the thing. You're like, dude, you're not helping me. You know,
Yeah.
at least you're not voting for bad, which is a whole lot of other people. So I'll give it
Right.
that. But help me, you know, make it swing my way. And I think that's where we all get lost in it, you know, where we're like, ooh, you know, I just needed to. Don't be so principled that it costs you everything. I think that's what it comes down to. Find a way to, you know, just work with each other and be happy and get along. Because being right is not always the answer, you know. And I the hate, that's the thing, is I hate to say it, because I make this mistake, right? I fall through this trap door all the time. You know, you know you shouldn't say something, but you're like, I just can't not. And maybe I'm worse than other people with that, where I just can't not say something. But you know, that's how it goes sometimes, right? Kevin, do you ever feel like that, or is it just you've got it under control? You're a well-mannered guy.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of times where I just don't say anything. You know what I mean? I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm just like,
Nope.
just don't say nothing. Just don't say anything.
Yeah, there's a Bible verse that somehow somebody felt the need to tell me early on, and it comes to mind all the time in my life. And it's Proverbs 10:19. A man who holds his tongue is wise. And I think, you know, that's what it comes down to. We need to, you know, maybe show a little restraint sometimes, and you could possibly get more. You know, they what is it? You catch more flies with honey. I don't know.
Yeah.
The flies go after honey. I don't even. I know they like poo.
I never understood that one.
Yeah, I don't know.
Then you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. But I mean, what about shit? You catch more flies with shit than honey. So I don't know.
So maybe if you start slinging some shit, then
that's how you get it.
That's how you get it. So I don't know. To each their own, right? All right. So anyway, I appreciate you guys sticking around. So with that, stay safe, and we will talk to you guys next week.